He thought he had won, but he had no idea she was coming back stronger. The ballroom was alive with murmurs and the clinking of crystal glasses, chandeliers spilling golden light across polished marble floors as Derek Lawson entered, his model fiancée trailing like a trophy, her laughter sharp and bright against the muted jazz playing softly in the background. Olivia Bennet paused at the doorway, her hand resting lightly on the strap of her emerald silk clutch, the subtle sway of her dress catching the light in a way that drew a few curious glances, her heart steady despite the familiar pang of memory that shot through her chest, the scent of Derek's cologne and his new companion a ghost she had learned to endure, and for a moment, she let her eyes sweep the room, noting familiar faces from the city's elite, the socialites she had once known, the ones who had smiled politely while whispering behind her back, the weight of their stares no longer pressing on her shoulders, but merely bouncing off the armor of confidence she had painstakingly rebuilt. Over the last 12 months, she recalled late nights in her small studio apartment, the quiet hum of the heater, the scent of old books and fresh paint, moments spent designing interiors for clients who believed in her vision, the sense of control returning to her life, like a tide washing away the debris of her past. She breathed in, allowing the subtle traces of jasmine from her perfume to mingle with the faint aroma of the ballroom, and then she moved, each step measured and deliberate. Across the polished floors, a rhythm of calm power that contrasted sharply with Derek's animated gestures, the flash of cameras capturing moments meant to assert dominance. Unaware that the woman he once underestimated was no longer the same, her gaze lifting to meet his for the briefest of seconds, a spark of recognition and silent warning. She was here, fully present, her own narrative ready to unfold. And as she approached the main table, a low murmur passed through the crowd, anticipation. Hanging like electricity in the air, a subtle shift in the balance that Derek could not yet perceive. Every calculated smile he offered now met with a composed, poised presence that exuded quiet authority. Olivia Bennet, once cast aside and dismissed, now a figure who carried both the mystery of resilience and the promise of revelation. The soft click of her heels a metronome to the suspense building in the room, and the guests leaned subtly forward in their seats, sensing the coming convergence, the quiet before a storm that would leave everyone astonished. Her eyes scanned the gala, landing briefly on the balcony where the evening sky spilled a deep indigo over the city, a reminder of distance traveled and battles silently won. A subtle inhale, the lift of her chin, the set of her shoulders, all signaling a readiness to confront what was once unbearable. The world unaware that the quiet woman at the entrance was poised to become the center of attention in a way that would render past perceptions obsolete. And just as she stepped fully into the light of the chandelier, a shadow at her side signaled the presence of Julian Hawke, the billionaire whose calm confidence radiated authority without effort, his hand brushing hers in an almost imperceptible acknowledgement, the silent communication of allies reunited, a force that would make the forthcoming moments both inevitable and unforgettable. And the camera lingered on Derek's face, a flicker of doubt crossing features accustomed to control, as Olivia's serene, knowing smile promised that the evening was far from ordinary and the real story was only beginning. The soft hum of conversation and the gentle clink of silverware had shifted to a background murmur as Olivia Bennet allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, her mind tracing the path that had brought her here, away from the shadow of Derek Lawson and the years of doubt and quiet despair. She remembered the first nights alone in her modest West Village apartment, the pale light of dawn slipping through the blinds onto the stacks of design sketches that were slowly transforming into a thriving freelance business, each project a small victory that reminded her of her own competence and creativity. The scent of fresh paint and varnish mingling with the faint aroma of roasted coffee beans that she drank to keep herself focused and alert. And there had been months of hesitation, of quiet strategizing, learning to navigate contracts, to present herself confidently to clients who needed assurance of her vision and reliability, the sense of reclaiming agency in her life, the knowledge that she could create a future of her own choosing. And Julian Hawke had appeared not as a savior but as a kindred spirit who recognized her determination and resilience, his presence calm, measured, reassuring, never imposing but always supportive. a partner who shared her ambition and respected her autonomy. Their conversations flowing effortlessly, full of ideas and possibilities, and the realization that she was carrying his child had added a layer of purpose and protection, a private joy that strengthened her resolve, making every step she took toward tonight heavier with meaning yet lighter in spirit. For she knew that the years of humiliation and underestimation had forged a fortitude that no display of Derek's arrogance could dismantle. She could still feel the echoes of his smug expressions, the way he had assumed her passivity, his failure to anticipate the transformation she had undergone, the way he believed her absence from social circles and high society had left a void easily ignored. But she had learned to cultivate her own network, to make her presence felt not through attachment to his status, but through her own accomplishments. And as she adjusted the gentle fold of her dress and allowed her gaze to sweep across the polished floors of the grand ballroom, she imagined the surprised murmurs and the unguarded glances that would follow her entrance, the delicate interplay of light on her emerald gown reflecting the quiet authority she now possessed, the calm steadiness of her breath, the measured steps that carried her forward with certainty, each movement an assertion of self-possession, the awareness that Derek's eyes would search for the vulnerable, the familiar, but would find only strength, composure, and the subtle aura of someone who had emerged victorious through patience, resilience, and foresight. And she held on to that moment, that equilibrium, savoring the weight and significance of her personal evolution, knowing that the steps she took next would not just be a crossing of a room but a declaration, a silent announcement that she had not only survived the past but had mastered it, that the quiet power she now wielded was an inheritance of her own making, a promise that the world would notice, that Derek Lawson would realize, perhaps too late, that the woman he once dismissed could command presence, influence, and attention in ways he had never imagined. And as the chandeliers glittered above and the orchestra swelled softly, Olivia's eyes lifted to meet Julian's, and in that subtle, unspoken exchange, they shared the knowledge that the night ahead would unfold exactly as they had prepared, with every gesture, every glance, and every measured word serving to illuminate the full measure of her regained dignity and the compelling force of her quietly orchestrated ascent. The room fell into a hush as Olivia Bennet and Julian Hawke approached the center of the ballroom, every head turning, whispers rippling like a current through the crowd, Derek Lawson's confident posture faltering as he finally registered the full presence of the woman he had underestimated, Olivia's emerald silk gown shimmering under the chandelier lights, the subtle movement of the fabric like a silent proclamation of her resilience and newfound authority, Julian's calm, measured steps beside her only amplified the contrast, the quiet power of their entrance demanding attention without a single word. Olivia's gaze swept the assembled guests, lingering briefly on faces that once doubted her, that had offered polite smiles while silently judging her trajectory, now awash in a combination of surprise and awe. Derek's expression betrayed a flicker of disbelief, his mind racing to reconcile the woman standing before him with the one he thought he knew. And as Olivia's hand brushed Julian's lightly, a gesture both natural and deliberate, it sent a clear signal that she was no longer the shadow in the background, that she was the orchestrator of her own narrative. The whispers turned to murmurs of astonishment as she reached the center, the soft click of her heels punctuating the anticipation in the air, and the orchestra's notes seemed to swell in recognition of the moment's significance. Olivia allowed a measured, serene smile to touch her lips, a quiet acknowledgement of the journey that had brought her here, and in that instant, Derek felt the weight of years lost, the realization that his assumptions about her had been entirely wrong. The crowd's attention held rapt not by spectacle or flamboyance, but by the undeniable presence of a woman who had emerged stronger, wiser, and fully in command of her destiny. Julian's eyes met hers, a silent exchange of trust and partnership, underscoring that her triumph was shared. And as Olivia raised her head to survey the room, the air seemed charged with the possibilities of what was to follow. Every subtle shift in posture, every controlled step, every glance calculated yet effortless, reinforcing the fact that she was no longer defined by the past but by the authority she commanded in the present. Derek's voice caught somewhere between incredulity and disbelief his earlier confidence now tempered by the undeniable evidence of her transformation. And as Olivia and Julian moved gracefully through the crowd, acknowledging familiar faces with a composed nod or gentle smile, the tension in the room built to a quiet crescendo, an electric anticipation that hinted at further revelations yet to unfold. And though no words were spoken, the message was clear to all who observed. Olivia Bennet had not just returned. She had redefined the terms of her own story, and the night, with all its grandeur and expectation, would bear witness to her unassailable presence and the subtle yet profound impact of a woman who had mastered her own destiny. Olivia Bennet moved through the ballroom with a measured grace, her presence commanding attention not through loud gestures, but through the subtle aura of confidence she had cultivated over months of determination and focus, the soft shimmer of her emerald silk gown catching the light in every step, reflecting both her journey and her triumph. Julian Hawke walking steadily beside her, his calm authority a mirror to her own, together creating a presence that drew eyes and hushed whispers. Derek Lawson remained rooted near the grand staircase, his usual air of dominance fractured by the undeniable evidence of the woman he had once dismissed now standing poised, accomplished, and radiant before him. Olivia's gaze briefly swept the crowd, noting the familiar faces who had once whispered and judged, now caught off guard by the sight of her composure and the quiet power radiating from her every movement. Each subtle tilt of her head, each deliberate step toward the center of the room, reinforced the shift in dynamics, a silent declaration that she was no longer defined by past mistakes or humiliations. Memories of late nights in her small studio apartment returned, the scent of paint and polished wood mingling with the faint aroma of coffee, the painstaking hours spent building her independent business, learning contracts, and delivering flawless projects. The sense of agency and self-reliance she had gained now visible in her posture and the ease of her expression. She remembered the first time Julian Hawke had acknowledged her ideas without hesitation, the partnership and mutual respect that had blossomed into trust and admiration. And as she allowed herself a small, serene smile, the crowd sensed the culmination of resilience and strategy, the subtle but profound message that she had become the architect of her own destiny. Derek's eyes widened imperceptibly, the earlier smug confidence giving way to a slow realization that the woman he assumed powerless had orchestrated every detail of her re-entry into his world. The gentle click of her heels across the polished marble seemed to echo through the grand hall, punctuating the tension, signaling the inevitable confrontation of presence without confrontation. Olivia's mind focused, each breath a rhythm of calm anticipation, aware of the whispers and glances that followed her, but unmoved by them. Julian's hand brushing hers in a quiet, understated acknowledgement, the silent partnership reinforcing her poise. The ballroom itself seeming to adjust to their combined presence, a subtle shift in energy, as if the space recognized the arrival of someone who had reclaimed authority. Derek's jaw tightened imperceptibly, his attempts at maintaining composure failing under the weight of Olivia's quiet, calculated display of confidence. The guests leaned in subtly, sensing the contrast between his faltering dominance and her assured command, the chandeliers above casting fractured light across the room that mirrored the fractured perceptions. The realization dawning that the narrative he had assumed control over was no longer his to define. And as Olivia paused briefly, her eyes meeting Julian's in a glance that spoke volumes of shared understanding, the room held its collective breath, the soft hum of conversation muted by the gravity of the moment, and in that suspended interval, the promise of revelation, strategy, and transformation lingered, suggesting that the unfolding of the evening would redefine alliances, perceptions, and power without a single word needing to be spoken. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected in Olivia Bennet's eyes as she guided Julian Hawke through the crowd, each step deliberate, measured, and commanding, drawing subtle gasps and quiet admiration from the attendees, the polished marble beneath their feet echoing with a rhythm that underscored the careful orchestration of her presence. Her gaze briefly met Derek Lawson's across the room, and in that instant, she noted the tension in his posture, the way his usually confident smile faltered as the full scope of her transformation registered. She could almost hear the silent calculations running through his mind, and yet she remained poised. Each breath steady, her spine straight, her movements a testament to the months of resilience, rebuilding, and careful planning that had led her to this moment. Julian's calm presence beside her reinforced her authority, their partnership unspoken but understood, a silent testament to the trust and respect they shared. Olivia's thoughts wandered briefly to the months of quiet work in her studio, the soft hum of the heater, and the faint smell of varnish and paint as she labored over each design project, the long hours of negotiation and presentation that had taught her to project confidence and grace, the sense of agency slowly becoming an innate part of her posture and demeanor. And now, here she was, every detail of her preparation culminating in a presence that spoke louder than any words. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the whispers of the crowd, the subtle glances exchanged, the astonishment at her elegance and composure. She allowed herself a brief smile, measured and serene, a quiet acknowledgement of her triumph over years of underestimation and subtle humiliation. The ballroom seemed to bend to their combined presence, Olivia and Julian moving as a unit, their calm, confident steps creating a magnetic pull, drawing attention, respect, and curiosity in equal measure. Derek's earlier display of dominance now seemed fragile against the subtle authority Olivia exuded. The contrast undeniable, every gesture she made intentional, yet effortless, every glance calculated to convey calm control, the audience captivated by the shift in dynamics, the murmurs growing louder as they moved through the crowd, and she could sense Derek's inner turmoil, the realization dawning that the woman he had once dismissed had become fully independent, powerful, and poised, a force entirely her own. The chandeliers cast fractured light across the room, highlighting the fluid motion of her gown and the quiet interplay of confidence and elegance, Julian's hand brushing hers with understated acknowledgement, the silent affirmation of a shared understanding and strategy. Olivia allowed her eyes to lift, surveying the guests with a composed, subtle authority, a gentle smile playing at her lips as the weight of her journey and the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming her narrative settled upon her. The room holding its collective breath, sensing the culmination of patience, resilience, and careful orchestration, and in that pregnant pause, Olivia Bennet knew that the night ahead would unfold in her favor. Each interaction, each glance, each carefully measured moment reinforcing the undeniable fact that she had arrived not merely to be seen, but to command attention, respect, and admiration in every corner of the grand hall. The soft murmur of the crowd shifted as Olivia Bennet paused near the center of the ballroom, Julian Hawke standing slightly behind her, an anchor of calm in the midst of the glittering chaos. She allowed her gaze to sweep across the room again, noting subtle gestures and whispered exchanges, the awareness of every eye on her creating a tension that was both exhilarating and controlled. She remembered the months of preparation that had led to this precise moment, the long nights spent reviewing layouts, presentations, and personal strategies, the deliberate building of networks that respected her talents rather than judged her by past associations. Every project she completed, every client she impressed, had added a layer of confidence and authority now radiating from her posture and expression. Derek Lawson's earlier bravado had dulled as he watched the composed elegance and quiet power she carried, the realization settling that the woman he had underestimated was no longer confined to the past. Olivia adjusted the gentle drape of her gown, emerald silk catching the light, reflecting her meticulous attention to detail and the unspoken declaration that she had claimed her narrative. Julian's presence reinforced her strength without overshadowing it, the subtle interplay between them exuding mutual respect and unspoken coordination. The crowd leaned in subtly, sensing the shift, the contrast between Derek's uncertainty and Olivia's self-assured command of the space. Each footstep she took echoed softly against the marble floor, measured and deliberate, punctuating the tension and anticipation that had built since her entrance. She allowed a serene, confident smile to touch her lips, a quiet acknowledgement of her endurance and triumph over the doubts and dismissals of the past. And in that single glance toward Julian, a subtle nod confirmed that their strategy was unfolding exactly as intended. Derek's expression flickered with a blend of disbelief and forced composure, the careful balance of his world beginning to crumble under the weight of Olivia's presence and the unspoken assertion of her regained authority. She moved through the crowd with effortless grace, acknowledging familiar faces with nods and polite smiles, every gesture reinforcing the contrast between her independence and Derek's faltering control, the soft clink of glasses and hum of conversation now punctuated by the electric undercurrent of tension and attention she carried, the chandeliers above scattering fractured light across the polished floors, the reflections catching the emerald of her dress and the subtle cues of her poised demeanor. Olivia Bennet had transformed her past trials into quiet strength. Each subtle movement, each measured breath, and each controlled glance signaling to the world that she had mastered her story, the room holding its collective breath. In the awareness of this shift, anticipation hanging like fine threads in the air, and as she lifted her chin slightly and allowed her eyes to sweep across the assembly, it became clear that the evening was now entirely hers to define, with every subtle interaction, every glance, and every carefully orchestrated movement serving as a testament to her resilience, power, and the beginning of a new chapter that promised to leave a lasting impression on all who watched. Olivia Bennet paused at the edge of the grand ballroom, the subtle glow of the chandeliers casting delicate light across the polished marble and illuminating the folds of her emerald silk gown as whispers circulated like a gentle current through the crowd. Julian Hawkes standing steadfast beside her, exuding a quiet confidence that balanced her composed poise. She allowed her gaze to scan the room with measured precision, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the exchange of glances among familiar faces, the unspoken acknowledgement that something extraordinary was unfolding. Derek Lawson remained near the staircase, his earlier bravado fading as he watched her move with an ease and authority that contrasted sharply with his unsettled presence. The memory of months spent in focused determination, late nights in her studio, surrounded by sketches, fabric swatches, and soft light, resurfaced as a reminder of the deliberate choices and resilience that had led her to this moment. Each project completed, each client impressed, each small victory carefully accumulated into the quiet power she now radiated. Her steps across the marble floor were soft but purposeful, echoing subtly in the high-ceilinged space, a rhythm of control that drew attention without the need for words. Julian's hand brushing lightly against hers conveyed the unspoken solidarity between them, a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared purpose. The guests shifted subtly in their seats, sensing the contrast between Derek's discomfort and Olivia's assured command of presence, every nod and polite acknowledgement of the crowd reinforcing her authority and the undeniable evidence of her transformation. The chandeliers above fractured the light across the room in patterns that highlighted the folds of her dress and the subtle cues of confidence she carried. The air seemed charged with anticipation, each whispered comment amplifying the awareness of a carefully orchestrated entrance and presence. Derek's expression betrayed the dawning comprehension that the woman he had assumed powerless was not only independent but fully capable of commanding attention and shaping perception. Olivia's eyes lifted briefly to Julian's, a shared glance signaling that their preparations had achieved the intended effect. The subtle interplay of body language, posture, and calm composure radiating a force of personality that filled the room without overt action. Each step she took, each measured glance, each quiet breath, reinforced the reality that she had reclaimed her narrative, her life, and her space. The ballroom seemed to adjust to their combined presence, a quiet acknowledgement of the shift in dynamics, the tension mounting yet controlled, creating a sense of anticipation that promised further revelations and affirmations of the transformation she had undergone. And as she allowed a small, serene smile to touch her lips, it became evident to all present that Olivia Bennet had returned not merely to participate, but to define the terms of the evening, to silently assert the resilience, strength, and authority she had meticulously cultivated, leaving Derek, the onlookers, and the broader room suspended in quiet awe and anticipation of the unfolding story yet to be revealed. The soft glow of the chandeliers bathed Olivia Bennet in a warm light as she navigated the ballroom with a deliberate elegance, Julian Hawke beside her, a subtle anchor of strength that complemented her poised demeanor. every movement measured yet effortless, commanding attention without a word. She noticed the subtle shifts in the crowd as whispers began to spread. The realization in their eyes that she was no longer the woman they had once underestimated. The months of careful planning and personal reinvention reflected in every step she took. The faint scent of her perfume mingling with the delicate aromas of the gala. Each note a subtle declaration of her regained authority. She recalled the hours spent in her studio apartment perfecting designs, negotiating contracts, and cultivating relationships built on respect and recognition. Experiences that had honed her confidence and instilled a quiet power now. Visible in her posture and expression, Derek Lawson lingered near the staircase. His usual air of control diminished as he observed her composed grace and the understated yet undeniable presence she radiated. Every detail of her appearance, from the shimmer of her emerald silk gown to the subtle sway of her hair, contributed to an aura of meticulous sophistication. Julian's hand brushed lightly against hers, a silent acknowledgement of the trust and partnership they shared, their combined presence subtly shifting the atmosphere of the room, the murmurs growing louder as attention centered on them. The contrast between Derek's unsettled demeanor and Olivia's calm authority impossible to ignore. The chandeliers fractured the light across the polished floors, highlighting the flow of her gown and the precision of her steps. Each movement a testament to the months of resilience and strategy that had led to this precise moment. Olivia allowed her gaze to sweep the room once more, noting familiar faces, former acquaintances who had once dismissed or underestimated her, now caught off guard by the quiet power and elegance she displayed. The orchestra's soft notes underscoring the tension and anticipation that hung in the air, her serene smile a subtle assertion of her presence and a reflection of the control she had reclaimed over her life. Derek's confident posture now rigid with a mix of surprise and apprehension, the silent acknowledgement that the woman he had once presumed powerless had transformed into a figure commanding attention and respect. Olivia's eyes met Julian's in a glance full of unspoken understanding, a reminder that their preparation and strategy were unfolding flawlessly. The ballroom seemed to adjust to the rhythm of their movement, a magnetic pull drawing attention, admiration, and curiosity. Every gesture, every tilt of her head, every controlled breath reinforcing the fact that she had reclaimed her story and her space. The room held its collective breath as the realization spread that Olivia Bennet's return was more than a presence. It was a declaration, a quiet yet undeniable assertion of strength, resilience, and the promise of events yet to unfold. The tension in the air charged with anticipation, the subtle dynamics shifting in her favor, signaling that the night would witness the culmination of her careful orchestration and the full measure of her quiet, commanding power. Olivia Bennet's steps carried a quiet authority as she moved deeper into the grand ballroom, the soft glow of chandeliers reflecting on her emerald silk gown, each subtle shimmer reinforcing the transformation that had taken months of careful planning and deliberate action. Julian Hawke remained close beside her, a constant pillar of calm and assurance, their presence together creating an aura of composed power that drew the attention of every guest. Derek Lawson lingered near the far end, his usual confidence tempered by the undeniable control and poise Olivia radiated. She allowed herself a brief glance toward him, noting the flicker of recognition and disbelief in his eyes. The months of strategizing, rebuilding her life, and cultivating both personal and professional authority crystallized into the precise expression and posture she now carried effortlessly. The gentle click of her heels on the marble floors provided a rhythm to the hushed whispers and shifting gazes that followed her, every movement, every tilt of her head, every careful breath contributing to the magnetic pull she now held over the room. Her mind briefly revisited the nights spent alone in her studio apartment, the faint smell of paint and varnish mingling with coffee, the meticulous work, the calls, the negotiations, and the late nights refining details, all of it contributing to the subtle but undeniable command she exercised in every glance and gesture. Julian's presence, calm and measured, accentuated the sense of partnership and respect that underscored her authority. The crowd, leaning in subtly, sensing the shift between Derek's faltering certainty and Olivia's steady, assured composure, she allowed a small, serene smile to play across her lips, a quiet declaration of triumph and self-possession. The chandeliers above scattering light that caught the folds of her dress and the subtle poise of her movements. The orchestra playing softly, their notes amplifying the tension and anticipation that seemed to hang over the gathering like a delicate veil. Derek's shoulders tightened imperceptibly, the room's energy shifting in her favor. Every gesture, every subtle nod and acknowledgement from Olivia reinforcing her regained status and quiet authority. The murmurs among guests growing as recognition of her transformation spread. She lifted her chin slightly, eyes sweeping across the assembled crowd with calm assurance. Each glance a reinforcement of the journey from underestimation to undeniable influence. Julian's hand brushed hers with a light but firm touch. A shared understanding and unspoken solidarity that further amplified the effect of their combined presence, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. The guests sensing the careful orchestration, the subtle shift in balance and power, and as Olivia paused briefly to acknowledge a familiar face, her serene demeanor and quiet control communicated volumes without words, leaving Derek and the crowd alike in a suspended moment of realization that the woman standing before them had fully reclaimed her narrative, her space, and her influence. The ballroom itself seemed to recognize the weight of her presence, every reflection, every soft note, every whisper reinforcing that Olivia Bennet had not only returned but had reshaped the evening and the perceptions of all who observed. The promise of further revelations lingering, the tension and expectation carrying the room toward the next unfolding moment of her quiet, undeniable triumph. Olivia Bennet felt the gentle press of Julian Hawke's presence at her side as she navigated the final stretch of the ballroom, the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses blending into a muted symphony that underscored the charged atmosphere. Her eyes swept across the room with calculated precision, noting the subtle shifts in posture and the barely perceptible gasps as guests registered the full measure of her presence. Every step she took on the polished marble floors was deliberate, measured, and filled with the quiet authority she had meticulously cultivated over the past year. Julian's hand brushing hers occasionally, a subtle signal of shared understanding and silent coordination, reinforcing the quiet power of their entrance and the impact of their combined presence. Derek Lawson lingered near the grand staircase, his composed facade cracking as he realized the transformation in the woman he had once dismissed, the months of careful planning, hard work, and personal growth now evident in her calm confidence. The shimmer of her emerald silk gown catching the chandelier light, highlighting the precise, graceful movements she made. The gentle sway of the fabric a visual testament to her regained poise and control. Olivia allowed a brief, serene smile to grace her lips, a quiet acknowledgement of the years of resilience, the challenges overcome, and the careful rebuilding of her life and reputation. The subtle fragrance of her perfume mingling with the delicate scent of roses and polished wood in the room, reinforcing the aura of refinement and command she now exuded. The guests leaned in subtly, sensing the deliberate orchestration, the contrast between Derek's faltering composure and Olivia's assured poise undeniable. Each gesture, each tilt of her head, and each controlled breath signaling not only her presence, but her mastery over the narrative. The chandeliers above fractured the light across the room, illuminating the folds of her gown and the careful, deliberate expression she wore, the orchestra's soft notes punctuating the tension and anticipation in the air. Derek's jaw tightened imperceptibly, the room's energy shifting further as whispers and glances confirmed the recalibration of power. Olivia's eyes met Julian's. A brief, unspoken exchange that affirmed the effectiveness of their preparation. Every subtle nod, every gentle adjustment of posture reinforcing the awareness that she had arrived not to simply participate, but to command attention, respect, and recognition. The crowd held its breath, the air thick with anticipation and quiet awe, sensing the transformation that had taken place and the precise, confident way she moved through the space, her serene expression, graceful movement, and calm authority asserting the culmination of months of resilience, hard work, and deliberate strategy. The ballroom itself seeming to adjust to the presence of a woman who had reclaimed her narrative, her space, and her influence, and in the faint sparkle of her eyes, the subtle curve of her lips, and the quiet assurance of her steps. It became unmistakably clear that Olivia Bennet had orchestrated an entrance and presence that left a lasting impression, signaling that the evening's events would unfold according to the quiet, undeniable power she now held. The room poised at the precipice of recognition, respect, and the subtle reverberation of a victory long in the making, and the guests could only watch as every step, glance, and gentle gesture communicated the message that Olivia had fully reclaimed her life, her authority, and the attention of everyone in her orbit. Olivia Bennet paused at the center of the grand ballroom, the soft light from the chandeliers scattering across her emerald silk gown, each fold reflecting the months of preparation, resilience, and careful cultivation of her presence. Julian Hawke, beside her, exuding a quiet, unwavering authority that complemented her own, together creating a magnetic force that drew the attention of every guest without the need for a single word. Derek Lawson's expression faltered as he recognized the full measure of the transformation before him, the confident grace, the controlled composure, and the understated power that Olivia radiated. She allowed her gaze to sweep over the crowd, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the murmurs, and the startled glances that confirmed the impact of her entrance. Every detail from the shimmer of her gown to the poised tilt of her chin reinforced the message that she had reclaimed her narrative, her life, and her influence. Julian's hand brushed lightly against hers, a silent gesture of solidarity and shared understanding that underscored their coordination and the quiet authority they now commanded together. Olivia reflected briefly on the months of hard work, late nights in her studio surrounded by sketches, fabric samples, and the soft hum of the heater, the painstaking efforts to rebuild her career, assert her independence, and cultivate networks that respected her abilities rather than diminished them. Each challenge overcome had strengthened her resolve and confidence, now visible in her measured steps, her serene expression, and the effortless authority she carried. The room seemed to bend subtly to their presence, guests leaning in, whispers amplifying, attention fully drawn to her controlled elegance, the orchestra's notes mingling with the quiet gasps and soft murmurs, heightening the tension and anticipation in the space. Derek's jaw tightened, the realization dawning that the woman he had once underestimated had orchestrated every aspect of her return with precision, her posture, gestures, and expressions all reinforcing the strength and mastery she now held. Olivia allowed a soft, confident smile to touch her lips, a subtle acknowledgement of the triumph over past doubts and dismissals, the chandeliers casting fractured light across the ballroom, highlighting the delicate interplay of movement, poise, and quiet authority she carried. Every breath, every glance, every small gesture asserting her presence and mastery of the narrative. The crowd collectively sensing the culmination of months of resilience, strategy, and personal growth. A moment suspended between anticipation and recognition. Julian's calm, steady presence reinforcing the subtle but undeniable command she held. Olivia lifted her chin slightly, eyes meeting his in a silent affirmation that their preparations had succeeded, the room holding its collective attention, every guest witnessing the balance of control, elegance, and quiet power. And though no words were spoken, the statement was clear. Olivia Bennet had fully reclaimed her life, her story, and her influence, and the evening's unfolding moments would reflect the subtle yet profound shift in perception and authority that she had so carefully orchestrated, leaving Derek, the guests, and the entire ballroom suspended in a moment of awe, anticipation, and quiet acknowledgement of her undeniable presence and triumph. Olivia Bennet stood in the center of the grand ballroom, the soft glow of the chandeliers catching the shimmer of her emerald silk gown, each movement deliberate, measured, and full of quiet authority. Julian Hawke beside her exuding a calm confidence that perfectly complemented her own, together forming an unspoken partnership that drew the eyes and whispers of every guest. She allowed her gaze to sweep across the room, taking in the startled expressions, the subtle shifts in posture, and the quiet astonishment of those who had once underestimated her. Derek Lawson lingered near the staircase, his carefully maintained composure now tinged with disbelief as he observed her poised presence, every step, every gesture, every subtle tilt of her head radiating the months of preparation, resilience, and personal growth that had culminated in this moment. Olivia reflected briefly on the countless hours spent rebuilding her life, from long nights in her studio, surrounded by sketches, fabric, samples, and soft lamplight to meticulously cultivated relationships built on respect. Each small victory layered into the quiet power she now exuded. Julian's hand brushed hers in a subtle, reassuring gesture, the unspoken acknowledgement of shared purpose and strategy reinforcing her confidence. The ballroom itself seemed to adjust to their combined presence, the murmurs growing as the contrast between Derek's faltering authority and Olivia's calm command became increasingly apparent. The polished marble floors reflected the fractured light of the chandeliers, highlighting the gentle sway of her gown and the precise, graceful rhythm of her movements. The soft notes of the orchestra underscoring the anticipation that hung in the air. Olivia allowed a serene smile to grace her lips, a quiet acknowledgement of the triumph she had earned through perseverance and careful planning. Each measured breath, each glance across the room reinforcing her regained agency and authority. The guests sensing the subtle yet undeniable power she carried, every nod, every polite acknowledgement of familiar faces further asserting her presence. Derek's earlier confidence now gave way to a dawning realization of the transformation that had taken place. Olivia's eyes met Julian's in a brief, unspoken exchange, their understanding and coordination evident, the room holding its collective attention, the subtle energy of expectation and recognition amplifying the impact of her presence. The chandeliers fractured the light across the polished surfaces, drawing attention to every careful, intentional detail and her posture and expression, the hushed whispers and soft movements of the guests punctuating the sense of awe. Olivia Bennett's quiet authority filling the space, every step a reaffirmation of the control she had reclaimed over her narrative, her life, and her public perception. The subtle tension in the room signaling not confrontation but acknowledgement, a shared understanding of the power she now wielded. And as she allowed her gaze to linger briefly on the crowd, the poised, serene expression and measured movements communicated in every nuance that Olivia had not merely returned. She had redefined the room, the evening, and the perceptions of all who watched. Her presence an unspoken testament to the months of resilience, strategy, and transformation that had led to this precise moment, leaving Derek, the guests, and the entire ballroom suspended in a moment of quiet admiration, recognition, and the anticipation of what would unfold next under the undeniable influence of her regained authority. The grand ballroom seemed to hold its breath as Olivia Bennett took the final steps toward the center, the emerald silk of her gown catching every chandelier light and reflecting it in gentle, deliberate ripples. Julian Hawke walking in quiet synchronization beside her, his presence a calm counterbalance to the magnetic force she projected, every eye in the room fixed on her. Whispers flowing like a soft current as guests tried to reconcile the poised, confident woman before them with the memory of a past they had long assumed defined her. Derek Lawson stood frozen near the staircase, his confident posture crumbling under the weight of the undeniable authority she carried. Each subtle gesture, each measured step radiating the months of resilience, planning, and personal growth that had culminated in this moment. The faint scent of jasmine and polished wood surrounding her, a sensory echo of the calm control she now wielded. Olivia allowed her gaze to sweep across the crowd, noting the astonishment and recognition in the expressions around her, a quiet smile touching her lips as she acknowledged the culmination of years spent rebuilding her life, refining her skills, and reclaiming her narrative. Julian's hand brushed hers lightly, a gesture of solidarity and unspoken understanding, reinforcing the quiet command they exerted together over the room, the orchestra's soft, elegant notes weaving through the tension, punctuating the hushed murmurs and shifting glances. Every step she took leaving a subtle mark of authority and presence, the chandeliers scattering light across the polished marble floors highlighting the gentle flow of her gown and the precise rhythm of her movements. Olivia's posture straight, her chin lifted, her eyes calm, yet piercing, sending a message to all present that she was not merely here to be seen. She was here to define the evening, the space, and the perception of herself in relation to those who had once dismissed her. Derek's earlier self-assurance now tempered with disbelief and the dawning comprehension of the transformation she had achieved, each movement and subtle expression reinforcing that she had mastered her narrative and reclaimed her power. The guests leaning in subtly, the murmurs growing as awareness spread of the quiet but undeniable shift in balance. Every subtle nod, every polite acknowledgement, every gesture of composure asserting her presence and impact, the ballroom itself seeming to recognize the completion of her journey, the tension of anticipation giving way to admiration and recognition. Olivia Bennet paused briefly to allow the collective gaze of the room to settle on her. The gentle lift of her hand, the soft curl of her lips, and the calm, assured look in her eyes communicating a silent triumph. The months of strategy, patience, and resilience now evident in the effortless authority she exuded. The quiet elegance and calculated poise conveying not just a return, but a full reclamation of self, narrative, and space. Leaving Derek, the crowd, and the entire room suspended in awe, anticipation, and respect, the evening reaching a subtle crescendo that signaled the start of a new chapter, a chapter defined by Olivia's regained power, quiet influence, and the unspoken promise that the story of her life, as she now directed it, had only just begun. And as the soft music played on, every subtle gesture and calm, confident movement hinted at the unfolding of the next moments, leaving the room with the lingering impression of a woman who had quietly, decisively, and brilliantly mastered her return.